September the 1st, 1939. German forces surged deeply into Poland, aiming for a swift, decisive victory. Barely 2 decades earlier, their ancestors had also marched, but in the opposite direction, back to Germany, defeated, humiliated. In November 1918, after 4 grueling years of World War I, Emperor Kaiser Wilhelm II was forced to abdicate. German armies were being crushed under relentless assaults by British, French, and American troops. The people faced starvation. Yet a dangerous narrative had already begun to spread. German generals and soldiers claimed they hadn't truly been beaten in battle, but betrayed by cowardly politicians at home. Still, at 11 o'clock, on the morning of November 11th, 1918, the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, World War I officially ended. The following month, President Woodrow Wilson arrived from the United States, pledging to forge a new world order. He convinced world leaders to join the League of Nations. At the Treaty of Versailles, it was agreed future disputes between nations would be resolved through debate, not bloodshed. The nations of Europe were liberated, and Germany's ally, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, was dismantled. From its ruins emerged Austria, Poland, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia. Germany itself was dramatically reduced in size. But this new arrangement carried a ticking time bomb. Not everyone celebrated the birth of nations like Czechoslovakia. Many contained large German populations. One day, the desire to reunite these German peoples would haunt Europe. The defeated German nation also faced one final humiliation. It was forced to pay a staggering £6.6 billion in reparations to France and Britain, an impossible burden. When Wilson returned to America, his new world order crumbled. The U.S. Congress refused to join the League of Nations, choosing isolation over international engagement. Germany had been transformed. It was Europe's largest country, but the militaristic monarchy was gone. A fragile democracy, the so-called Weimar Republic, had been born. But its foundations were shaky, battered by crises. Street clashes erupted between far-right nationalists and revolutionary communists. Then, in 1923, hyperinflation devastated the nation. Prices soared hundreds of % each month. Ordinary citizens saw their life savings vanish overnight. This chaos created fertile ground for radical populist politicians. Among them, Adolf Hitler. Hitler was Austrian by birth. He had fought courageously in World War I and earned the Iron Cross. Returning to Germany, he settled in Munich. His fiery speeches quickly won him influence over the small National Socialist or Nazi Party. In October 1923, Hitler and his followers attempted an armed coup against the Weimar government. The beer hall putsch failed. Hitler was sentenced to 9 months in prison. During confinement, he wrote Mein Kampf, My Struggle, blaming Germany's woes on the Jews and declaring the nation must rebuild and seek new territories in the East. Upon release, he dedicated himself to transforming the Nazi Party into a disciplined political force. From now on, power would come through the democratic system, not armed revolt. For the next 5 years, Weimar Germany saw relative stability. Support for extremist movements waned. Then, in October 1929, everything changed. The U.S. stock market collapsed. Billions of dollars were lost, triggering a global economic depression. In Germany, unemployment soared above 6 million. Only extremists appeared to offer solutions. Among them, Hitler. By 1931, the Nazi Party had become a mass movement. Its paramilitary wing, the SD, numbered nearly 3 million. In the 1932 elections, the Nazis became the largest party in the Reichstag. But Hitler refused to form a coalition, paralyzing parliament. President Hindenburg finally appointed Hitler as chancellor in January 1933. Within a month, the Reichstag building was set ablaze. Hitler accused the communists and demanded emergency powers. He then used those powers to ban all other political parties. In August 1934, President Hindenburg died. Hitler declared himself Führer, absolute leader of Germany. At first, the world saw little indication of what was to come. For 3 years, the Führer focused on rebuilding Germany's economy. Millions were poured into public works, including a 5,000-mile Autobahn network, absorbing the unemployed into productive labor. But in secret, Hitler was funding an enormous rearmament program. The Treaty of Versailles had limited the German army to 100,000 men. No air force, no tanks, no submarines were allowed. The army was quickly tripled in size. By 1935, Hitler openly flaunted Germany's new military might. A brand new air force, the Luftwaffe, was unveiled, 2,500 planes, more than Britain or France. Unemployment plummeted, and the Nazi Party's popularity soared. Now emboldened, the Führer took his first expansionist steps. In 1935, he reoccupied the Saarland district on the French border after a League of Nations-sanctioned plebiscite returned it to German control. A year later, German troops marched into the Rhineland, a region demilitarized by Versailles. Many observers felt Hitler was merely reclaiming German territory. Neither Britain nor France intervened. In 1936, Berlin hosted the Olympic Games. The Nazis were seen by much of the world as firm but fair, a government restoring national pride without threatening neighbors. Yet the signs of oppression were already visible. The Nuremberg Laws of 1935 forbade Jews from marrying true Aryans and stripped them of citizenship. But the first threats to global peace did not come from Hitler. They came from across the globe, from a rising power in the East, Japan. At the turn of the 20th century, Japan had become a military powerhouse. It defeated Russia in 1905 and fought alongside the Allies in World War I. Post-war, Japan was recognized as a major world power and joined the League of Nations. But politically, the nation was fragmented. Nominally a democracy, it retained strong feudal traditions. The emperor was revered as a living god, the ultimate authority. Japan faced enormous economic challenges. Its population was booming, but the country lacked natural resources to fuel industry. Leaders saw their solution in China's Manchuria, a land of fertile fields, coal, and minerals. Japanese troops were already stationed there. Other potential targets included European colonies in Asia, Burma, Malaya, Hong Kong, Indochina, and the Dutch East Indies. Yet Japan had to tread carefully. They didn't want to provoke the United States, a growing Pacific power. Despite anti-imperialist rhetoric, the U.S. maintained territories in the Philippines, Guam, and numerous islands. America had the strength to confront Japan, but the nation was distracted. The 1920s were the Jazz Age. Economic boom and the pursuit of pleasure dominated society. With its army reduced after World War I and a naval limitation treaty with Britain, France, and Japan, the U.S. inadvertently ceded Pacific naval dominance to Japan. Then came the Great Depression. A quarter of Americans lost their jobs. Tens of thousands were homeless. Pleasure was replaced by survival. Japan seized its opportunity. In 1931, without notifying its civilian government, Japanese forces in Manchuria captured the capital Mukden, then swiftly occupied the entire region. A puppet state, Manchukuo, was established under Henry Puyi, the last emperor of China, deposed in 1911. At its Geneva headquarters, The League of Nations faced its first major test. Japan was universally condemned, but Japan refused to comply, walking out of the League. The organization discovered it had no real power. Declared a pariah, Japan turned its eyes to further conquests in China. China was in chaos, divided between Chiang Kai-shek's government and the Communist Party. Civil war raged. By 1936, Japan and Germany signed a pact, an early step towards the Axis. The goal: protection against Soviet interference in China. In July 1937, Japan instigated a conflict with Chinese forces and invaded. At first, the Chinese were caught off guard. But soon, both nationalists and communists united to resist. Japanese forces conducted amphibious landings, and by year's end, they had seized much of northern China and the eastern coast. At first, the Chinese were caught off guard. But soon, both nationalists and communists united to resist. Japanese forces conducted amphibious landings, and by year's end, they had seized much of northern China and the eastern coast. The war was waged with extreme brutality. Cities were bombed indiscriminately. Foreigners in Shanghai were evacuated. The city endured a 3-month siege. The massacre escalated in Nanking, the Chinese capital, on December 17, 1937. Over 6 weeks, an estimated 300,000 civilians were killed. Rape and indiscriminate slaughter devastated the city. Even British and American warships were attacked. On December 12, 1937, the American gunboat Panay was bombed. 50 crewmen died. Yet the Western powers remained passive. The League of Nations was powerless. President Roosevelt of the United States considered a naval blockade. But Britain feared confrontation, offering only $25 million in military aid to Chiang Kai-shek. The Soviet Union limited its involvement to border skirmishes. China had no choice but to fight alone. In 1938, Japanese forces captured Canton, pushing Chinese troops westward. All the League's promises, all international rhetoric, had failed. Meanwhile, Europe was witnessing another rising dictator. Benito Mussolini, Italy's fascist leader, seemed almost absurd in retrospect. But in 1922, Italy was on the brink of chaos. Italy in 1922 teetered on the edge of anarchy. Strikes, land seizures, and political chaos gripped the nation. The democratic government appeared powerless. Benito Mussolini, war veteran and former journalist, seized the moment. He organized the Fascist Party, a right-wing nationalist movement. In August 1922, with a general strike paralyzing the country, Mussolini ordered his followers to march on Rome. Fearing civil war, King Victor Emmanuel invited Mussolini to form a government. Mussolini quickly crushed opposition, consolidating dictatorial authority. The government was appointed rather than elected, with the fascist Grand Council holding all real power. Mussolini's early actions made him immensely popular. Massive public works programs created jobs and modernized infrastructure. Corruption was curtailed. The mafia was largely neutralized. Italy's armed forces were rebuilt, including an advanced air force. In the Mediterranean, Mussolini assembled a fleet rivaling Britain and France combined. When the Great Depression hit, Italy weathered it better than most nations. Mussolini became a global model, strong, decisive, the opposite of weak democratic governments. But admiration was not enough. Mussolini aimed to revive the Roman Empire. His first target, Abyssinia, modern-day Ethiopia. Italian colonies already bordered Abyssinia, Eritrea, and Italian Somaliland. In December 1934, Italian forces provoked clashes at an oasis in the Ogaden region. Reinforcements arrived from Eritrea and Somaliland, demanding reparations from Abyssinia. Emperor Haile Selassie personally appealed to the League of Nations, a small nation threatened by a fellow League member, the ultimate test of international resolve. The League did nothing. Britain's Foreign Minister Anthony Eden attempted peace negotiations. Mussolini rejected them. In October 1935, Italy invaded from Eritrea and Somaliland. Abyssinia's forces, primitive and poorly equipped, were no match for modern artillery. The Italian Air Force dominated the skies, even dropping banned gas bombs. After 6 months, Abyssinia was fully occupied. Haile Selassie fled into exile in Britain. From Geneva, the League wrung its hands. Sanctions were imposed, but had minimal effect. Mussolini's aggression revealed two truths. The League of Nations was powerless, and Britain and France lacked the will to confront fascist expansion. Both Britain and France had been shattered by World War I. Their economies never fully recovered. Strikes, unrest, and mass unemployment persisted even before the Great Depression. Both nations faced the costs of managing sprawling empires, territories once held by Germany, and Middle Eastern lands from the Ottoman Empire. Above all, they were scarred by the staggering casualties of the First World War. A succession of British leaders, Lloyd George, Ramsay MacDonald, and Stanley Baldwin, all sought to avoid future wars. Despite immense sacrifices on the Western Front, Britain maintained a large conscript army at war's end, but it was quickly reduced to a small professional force designed to police the empire. The Great Depression ended any plans for modernization. Britain entered the pre-war years economically and militarily weakened. French losses in World War I were even heavier. A large conscript army was maintained, but birth rates declined during the 1920s, threatening manpower shortages by the mid-1930s. France adopted a purely defensive military strategy. The Maginot Line, a vast series of fortifications, was begun in 1930 along the German frontier, extending toward the Belgian border. In theory, it linked with Belgian defenses. France was capable of defending, but not of launching attacks. Even against Italy, had Britain deployed troops. Both nations also recognized Mussolini's Mediterranean navy outnumbered theirs. Italy's conquest of Abyssinia seemed distant and largely irrelevant. Europe's attention turned to a nearer threat, a resurgent and rearming Germany. Germany's growing power and Italy's would soon be tested in Spain. In 1936, Spain erupted into civil war. It was a brutal conflict, pitting family against family, communist against fascist, believer against atheist. A left-wing government had taken power in 1931, abolishing the monarchy. The king went into exile, and a republic was declared. In February 1936, leftist parties united in a popular front, narrowly winning national elections. Though their reforms were modest, strikes and land seizures triggered fears of a communist takeover. Within the Spanish army, a bastion of conservative and Catholic influence, senior officers considered a coup. Among them, General Francisco Franco, exiled to the Canary Islands, prepared his role. On July 17, 1936, army units in Spanish Morocco mutinied. The next day, Franco flew in, forming a nationalist movement to save Spain from communism. Mainland garrisons joined the revolt. The Popular Front called for volunteers to defend the Republic. Battle lines were drawn. Initially, Franco faced logistical challenges. His forces were in North Africa, needing to cross the Strait of Gibraltar. He turned to Hitler for assistance. Within a month, Luftwaffe transport aircraft began airlifting Franco's battle-hardened troops into southern Spain. At this stage, the Republic still seemed in control. Pro-Franco uprisings in Madrid and Barcelona were quickly suppressed. The east of Spain remained under Republican control. The nationalist forces were mostly confined to the northwest and parts of the south. But the situation changed dramatically as Hitler and Mussolini began supplying troops and weapons. The German dictator seized the chance to test his newly rebuilt military. Franco's nationalist army received modern weapons and equipment directly from Berlin. Italy sent thousands of troops, tanks, and aircraft to support the fascist cause. This was a laboratory for the future. Tanks, bombers, and air power were tested in real combat. Communications, strategy, and coordination were refined under battlefield conditions. The Republicans resisted fiercely. But the combination of German and Italian support turned the tide. By 1939, Spain lay devastated, millions displaced, cities destroyed, and tens of thousands killed. Hitler had demonstrated that modern mechanized war could be waged with devastating effect. Mussolini showed his forces could project power beyond Italy. Europe watched, but did little. The lessons of Spain would echo loudly in the years to come. Meanwhile, Germany's aggressive expansion continued. Austria and Czechoslovakia were next on Hitler's list. The world edged closer to a second global conflict. By March 1938, Hitler moved to annex Austria. The Anschluss was swift and largely unopposed. German troops marched in, uniting Austria with the Reich. Next came Czechoslovakia. Hitler demanded the Sudetenland, home to a significant German minority. Britain and France, following a policy of appeasement, pressured Czechoslovakia to yield. In September 1938, the Munich Agreement formalized the cession. Hitler promised no further territorial claims. The world believed peace had been preserved, but Hitler had no intention of stopping. By March 1939, he seized the rest of Czechoslovakia, violating all agreements. Europe now faced a looming storm. Poland, lying directly in Hitler's path, became the next target. The stage was set for global war. On September 1, 1939, German forces invaded Poland. World War II had begun. The lessons of Versailles, of appeasement, of League failures, and unchecked fascism would shape the century in ways few had imagined. The world was about to pay the ultimate price for its hesitation, its indecision, and its underestimation of men like Hitler and Mussolini.